And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soul Survivor podcast. We'll be reflecting on in this episode, this live, we'll be reflecting on Survivor Winners at War, season 40. Obviously, that concluded a week ago, but this will really be our, final podcast on season 40, unless something changes drastically within the next couple of weeks, and then we'll move on to off-season stuff. But before we completely move on, I certainly wanted to get to this and talk about, the kind of the legacy that season 40 will have going forward, Winners at War. So let's get right into it. So, and also just to mention, Hef is not with us tonight, so it's just me and Ryan, but that's fine. We'll, Hef will be back with us within a week or two. So that should be good. And, just to get it started here, Ryan, if we're talking about Survivor Winners at War, season 40, obviously an epic season, what will you remember if we're talking 5 years from now? What will be the thing that you remember about Survivor Winners at War?
Yeah, really quickly, Hef's not here, but we have the two of us. Podcasters are us. We're gonna make it a good recap episode. But no, I think that when you bring up a great word, legacy, what am I going to remember from Winners at War a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And it's the all-winner season. It's the season that we've been waiting for years, whether you were a young fan when Survivor first started, or you started halfway through a Heroes versus Villains like I did, or you started only in the last couple of seasons, maybe like Hef did. It means a lot to a lot of people because we've always wanted to see the best of the best go at it whenever you started watching the show. And I think when you say to me, what am I going to remember? I'm going to remember the very first scene where you have the men and the women on two different boats riding in. I'm seeing Amber for the first time since season 8. I'm seeing Ethan for the first time since Africa. I'm seeing some new faces, some faces I may have forgotten. That was just such a great moment to start the season. And of course, I'm going to remember the epic challenges. I'm going to remember the good, the bad, and the ugly with Edge of Extinction. I'm going to remember Tony's dominant win. There's a lot to take from the season, whether you are really high on the season or you're more neutral on the season. I think there's a lot of key character and gameplay moments you're going to remember.
Yeah, so I would say, you hit on a lot of what I was going to say, but I'm thinking that like 5 years from now, what I will remember is, yeah, like you said, that moment on the beach where they're all standing in a line, right? Where, when Jeff goes like, and if the stakes weren't high enough, this is for $2 million. That's like an epic moment because it's just like it's that one shot where you get to really see the whole cast there, and you're like, wow, this is. And I think Adam actually said the same exact thing when he stepped onto the beach. He's like, wow, this is really happening. So that's one thing I'll remember. I remember, when I first watched that, I was like, the anticipation and hype was just so much that was definitely a huge moment that I'll remember. And then the next thing that I think I'm really going to remember is you have what I think, and this was one of our Twitter questions that we'll dive a little bit deeper into. I think that Tony played the best game that we've ever seen and best winning game we've ever seen. So I think that I'm just going to remember Tony, running around the beach, being his Kage self, while also managing to get the job done in an all-winner season and becoming the greatest of all time. So that's really the main takeaways. When I think 5 years from now, like those will be the main things I remember. The amazing cast, probably the best cast of all time. Then that very beginning moment, and then all the Tony stuff. But now I wanted to switch it up a bit, and I wanted to ask you, what are your favorite moments this season? I'd love to talk about different specific moments that stand out and will certainly be remembered in Survivor history.
Yeah, for sure. And again, you bring up a good point though with the cast. I mean, for years, people said, the upper echelon, like, what do you define as the best cast ever? Or this is how you do casting. It's Heroes versus Villains, arguably the best cast in Survivor history. You also could argue Cambodia because we as the fans voted for the cast. But Winners at War at this point, I mean, we can talk about season rankings later in the podcast, but, Winners at War, you have to argue, is one of the greatest casts, if not the greatest cast in Survivor history. You're bringing back all these old school favorites, some of the best players in history, some of these newer players that are from the new school era. It's a really culmination and a celebration of what the show means to all of us, which I really respect. And I think another question to also delve into, maybe in an off-season podcast is, what would Winners at War would have looked like with different winners? Like if Tina was here, if Hatch was here, if Todd Herzog was here, if we had Earl, who we haven't seen since this season. If we had who's another female winner we haven't seen in a while, Vesepia. So basically, no matter what, who you could have added, this cast was amazing. Now, getting to your question of what moments am I going to remember specifically? Oh my God, the gameplay and character moments. I'm going to remember Jeremy and Tony going over the calendar and how many days are in a week. I'm going to remember Sarah's fashion show. I'm going to remember Nick sliding into scenes really quietly and then sliding back out. I'm going to remember Ben fighting with everyone. I'm going to remember Adam trying to get the fleur-de-lis off the podium. Now, in terms of gameplay moments, I'm going to remember Tony playing his butt off the whole season, socially, physically, and strategically. And I'm also going to remember players like Sophie rising to power, some people like Wendell falling from their previous season. A lot of great things I'm going to remember for sure.
Yeah, and I think that, we'll talk a little bit about each specific moment, but just for me, I think that, in terms of my favorite moments from the season, I already mentioned the whole beginning part, but then, once we actually get into the gameplay aspect, I think that this is so early on that I don't even know if people remember this, but do you remember at the very beginning you had like Boston Rob trying to take control and having people empty their bags, their bags at Tribal Council? Yeah. Then you had obviously the queen slaying moment with Denise where, she takes Sandra's idol and then uses it against her. And that is such an impactful moment. And when you go back and when people say, well, what if Denise voted out Tony there? Like Sandra wanted her to and did not vote out Sandra, then obviously the season finishes and changes completely, given that Tony ends up winning the season. So I think that that's just such a significant moment, not only to see a 2-time winner and Sandra fall in such a crazy way, but also the fact that the person who is saved by that vote ends up winning the season. So that's such a huge moment. I think it's one of the best idol plays that we've ever seen. And then, just to move on to other moments this season, you have obviously I'm going to call it the Tony episode where, he finds the idol, then he gets extorted, somehow manages to get all the tokens, wins immunity. And then while they're splitting votes, he manages to pull 4 people together to pull off a 4-3-2 on Sophie when she had an idol in her pocket. I think that's probably one of the best moves we've ever seen on Survivor. So I'll remember that. And pretty much, the whole way Tony played all the way along. There were so many great moments this season, and we could go on and on, but yeah.
In terms of the moments, yeah, I think that no matter what, you can't say this season wasn't entertaining. I mean, you can talk about the edit, you can talk about Edge of Extinction, but in terms of even the little things that we see Tyson buying the peanut butter, we're seeing Ben get flustered by Rob in the first 10 seconds of the game. Like, we're going to remember so many things about each of these episodes. And I think a big thing that leads into is rewatchability, because we always talk about, where do you rank the seasons? Who are the best players? But a question you don't see a lot is, hey, what season can I rewatch? Because I have people saying to me all the time, I'm sure, Dylan, you get this too. Newer fans of the show ask us, what season should we watch, or what order should we watch them in? And we always give them the seasons, but it brings up the question of, for people like us who might want to now go back in the offseason and watch older seasons, what has a high rewatchability? Like, I could go back and watch Heroes vs. Villains any day of the week. I could go back and watch Cambodia any day of the week. Pearl Islands any day of the week. Even though I like Blood vs. Water as a season, I probably could watch the post-merge any day of the week, but the pre-merge, not that much. So I feel like when we talk about Winners at War, it's going to have a lot of people saying, oh, I could go back and rewatch that, because every episode, like it or not, was a thrill ride.
Right. I completely agree with that. I think that, it's going to be one of those seasons that 10 years from now, just like Heroes Villains, you could watch and have the same exact enjoyment. I mean, just so many great characters on the TV. And at the same time, 2 players that I did not mention before when I was going on and on. But in terms of Sarah, you had the whole Cops Are Us story arc that could have came to a close. I assume it did, and we'll talk a lot about that later. But one of the best story arcs we've ever seen on Survivor. Tony and Sarah are undefeated when they play this game together. Cops Are Us, I should say, is undefeated because the first season they played together, Tony won. The second season they played together, Sarah won, and this season they played together and Tony won. So yeah, it's truly incredible going from one getting the best of the other to the other winning, and then to them kind of just helping each other to get to the ends and one of them eventually winning again. So it was just so amazing, especially that fire making challenge at the end. I mean, very, very emotional moment. And another player I wanted to just give a shout out to here is Michelle, who I think everyone a lot of people underestimated her going into the season. And as Michelle said, that was kind of her story, that people didn't think her win was that good. Didn't think that her win was deserved. People thought that Aubrey or Ty deserved to win the season instead. And Michelle really proved that, I believe she's the only player currently to play multiple times and not get voted out. So, I mean, Michelle really did prove herself. I think that in a different final three scenario, I definitely think she gets votes. I think that even with the final three scenario that she had, she deserved to get votes. And yeah, I just huge shout out to Sarah and Michelle for also upping their legacy as well.
Yeah. And speaking of Sarah and Michelle, you bring up a good point that I want to address. I thought this season with these players had a lot of like poetic moments, honestly. And this is something that if anybody watches Peridium on YouTube, he's amazing. You should check him out. He goes over a lot of these videos analyzing the players and the seasons. He's very talented. He talks about a lot of poetic moments this season. So like you just mentioned, Kapsaras has such a amazing story arc where they meet up. They're loyal for a time, then Tony breaks it, and then he wins the season. And then Sarah wins the next season when Tony goes early. And then now they're back together until the very end where one of them has to take out the other. It's really poetic. Michelle, early on in the season, we see her talking to Boston Rob about saying, I got a lot of flack for my win. People don't respect me a lot. I'm here to prove that I deserve that win against Aubrey. And ironically, and I also sent you a funny meme about this last week, but in 2016, you have people arguing Michelle should have got second and she won. Now people in 2020 are saying Michelle got third and she should have got second. So either way, Michelle should have got second place, people are saying. But that was poetic. Natalie, in her first season, her twin goes out first, Nadia, and then she wins the season. Now this season, she goes out first and then makes it to the end. We see Wendell make fun of Chris Noble, who he votes out at the merge, and then he goes out at the merge. Basically, not to go through every example, but there's a lot of ironic, poetic moments that I feel like put a nice bow on a lot of these character stories.
Yeah, and another thing I want to jump into is, you talk about the poetic moments, really that last episode, right after the Battle Back Challenge, you kind of had what you felt like was an end of an era for sure. So many players that you don't know if you'll ever see again. And it's kind of crazy to just think back and say, you know what? We started watching Boston Rob all these years ago. We started watching Amber all these years ago. And now to have it all come to an end, it does feel like some end of an era. And I know a lot of people are saying this. I think a major part of this season, and what makes it so interesting to talk about in a retrospective and a reflection, is that after the season, we don't know where Survivor's going. There's no, usually we hear what's up next. We know that it was renewed, but because they couldn't film, we don't know what the next themes are. Usually by now we know the themes of 41 and 42 and they'd have like some kind of cast leak. So we know the themes. We don't know where Survivor's going. And people have said, if Survivor ended today, you felt like the Tony and Sarah whole end. You felt like the ending to this season it could have ended Survivor in general. That's why I feel like it's such an end of an era, because you have players having their farewells after the Battle Back Challenge. And then you have, Tony and Sarah having such an amazing emotional moment, and then Tony winning. It just felt like a perfect end to what was truly a historic season. But I know we asked everybody. We said on Twitter, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and we will answer them on this podcast. And this goes the same for anybody who's watching right now. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and we will get right back to you eventually at some point here. Now, I think one of the most interesting questions, and it kind of ties into what we're just talking about here, is Once Upon an Island on Twitter. He asked us, "What are the odds?" Here, I'll read the exact question. He says, "What are your odds on each of these 20 winners returning and playing again?" So I think that this kind of end of an era talk kind of segues perfectly into that question. So what do you think, Ryan?
I was talking to my friend off the podcast about this, and I have to say, never say never. I know these people say I'm done, I'm hanging up the hat, but I mean, in some point in time, if Jeff asks you to come back, you might come back. If your living situation allows for it, maybe you'll do it. But I do think regardless of any changes happening, I think we're likely not going to see most of these people again, Dylan. I think that all the old schoolers, you can count out. I don't think we're seeing Amber, Danny, Ethan, Rob, Parv, Sandra, Tyson, Yule, anyone that went out in the pre-merge. I don't think we're seeing them again. I think that's why we got that shot of all of them talking after the challenge. Their arc is kind of done. They got what they wanted from the show, and there's nothing more for them to achieve. You're a winner. No one can take that away from you. You're one of technically 38 people, since Sandra and Tony won twice, but you're one of 38 people to have won the game out of like 600. So you get all the kudos in the world, but they're probably done with their story arcs. I think even new school players are done, honestly. Ben, with that move of taking himself out at Final Five to help Sarah, I think that showed he had some demons from his first season, and now he kind of put that to rest. Sarah seems like she fulfilled what she wanted to get out of here. I don't see how Natalie comes back from this. The only people I think from the season that we could see again, depending on the twist, are some of these new school players, like maybe a Wendell to redeem himself, maybe a Sophie, Adam, Michelle, and Nick. Those are the 5 names I came up with. Other than them, I'm hard-pressed to think of anyone else who's going to come back after the season.
Yeah, so, I mean, I agree with you. But, you know, when we got asked this question on Twitter, I went and I made a list, and I kind of rated them into different categories, so I'll read it off here. So in terms of players I think are very likely to play again, so at some point between now and either the end of the show or probably between 40 and 50, I think that Michelle will definitely play again. I just feel like that, you know, first of all, she said she would play again anytime if asked. That definitely is plays a huge role. But you know, I really feel like she proved herself, and people want to see her play again. And I think that Natalie will play again, just because I think that she kind of got a raw deal getting voted out first, based on the fact that she was stuck with Jeremy. And then she was amazing on Edge, battle all the way back, and ended up finishing second. So I think that Natalie will play again. I think that Wendell will play again. You know, I would love to see him redeem himself, especially because he was like a hero in the first season that he played, and then he was painted as a villain in this season. And then I think Adam definitely plays. I think Adam. Look, I think that, you know, people have very mixed opinions on Adam. You know, he got a ton of airtime before he got voted out, a ton of confessionals. And I think that, you know, after Adam made that move to try and pull what he thought was an idol off the podium at Tribal Council, I think that, first of all, I think that thought and move is going to change Survivor forever. I guarantee you that in one of the next 2 seasons, we're going to see an idol hidden at Tribal Council. So I think changes everything. And I think it just shows how smart Adam really is. I don't know if you read Adam's A&A on Reddit or if anyone did, but everything that he thinks about in terms of Survivor is just so smart. So like, he knows the game so well. And I think he'd definitely be open to playing again. So I could see Adam coming back. So those are my 4 players that are in the very likely to play again category. Now we have the 50-50 category, where I have Sophie, because I feel like Sophie also kind of had the Michelle type reception where people thought she was a bottom tier winner. And I think that she played one of the best games this season by far. So, I mean, whether she comes back or not, I think that that'll be up to her, because I think she'll definitely be asked back, in my opinion. Then we have Nick. Nick, I feel like also kind of got a weird kind of edit, but I think that Nick really knows what he's doing and probably played a better game than people think. Sarah is 50-50. This is an interesting one. I know probably people think that she's more unlikely to play again. I put it 50-50 because I think that, you know, she came so close to winning a second time. I really think that she could go far if she did play again, even though she's such a huge threat. So I think that, I don't know, I get a vibe from Sarah. I just listened to a video, you know, Survivor Specialist. They interviewed Sarah the other night. I listened to pretty much the whole thing, and I get a vibe that she would play again. So I put her in the 50-50 category. Then I put Ben in the 50-50 category, but towards the bottom of it, because I feel like his story arc did close. But I think that, you know, you were really able to see a human element of Ben this season that you did not get to see in another season. So now we move to the unlikely to play again category, where I have Tyson. I put him at the top half, though, because I think that if Tyson was asked back, he would have a hard time saying no, and I could 100% see them asking him back. But it would have to be some type of like Legends, like kind of crazy big season for him to come back. Then I have Kim, also kind of at the top end of the unlikely to play, because they kind of made it seem like Kim's story did end where she felt like she was perfect, and then, you know, she was not perfect this time. But I feel like I would like to see Kim with a chance to redeem herself from this. Not that she needs it. She's a legend either way, but I would like to see Kim with another chance just because she was so in control in the first season she played and not in control pretty much at all from what we saw this time. Then I also have Denise in the unlikely to play again, Danny in unlikely to play again, Tony in unlikely to play again, and Jeremy in unlikely to play again. In terms of Denise, I can't really see her playing again just because, you know, I don't know. I don't really see it for Denise. You know, she was one of the oldest members of this cast, and I definitely think that plays a role. And then in terms of Danny, I don't think that she would be asked back. Tony, I think it's funny because Tony got asked, would you play again? And he's like, oh, Survivor Seniors Edition. So look, we don't know about Tony. Is he joking around? Would he actually play again? Look, if Tony comes back again, there's probably a 0% chance he survives the first 3 votes. But
Yeah.
you see, you never know with Tony because he's Tony. But unlikely to play again. I also have Jeremy, as I said, because he seems pretty adamant that he was not going to play again after season 31. I definitely think he's done after this. Then I have my last category, which is very unlikely to play again. I have Rob, Sandra, Parv, Amber, Ethan, and Yule. I definitely think Amber's like 1,000,000% done. And then all the others I think are very, very likely done. But one thing to consider is that people were asking a lot of the players, would you do an Islands of the Idols 2 if Jeff wanted to do that? And Parv and Tyson both said they would love to do that. So I think that if they're willing to come back in that capacity, I don't see why Jeff and production would not want to take advantage of them offering that. So that's my complete list to who I think has a chance to come back and who I don't.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up some good points. I think you put it into more tiers of like, you know, likely, somewhat likely, 50-50. So you had it more thought out. I just basically said, you know, 3 categories, like, are you not going to play again at all? No shot, maybe, and likely. So I think we were on the same page with those who will likely play again and those who might play again. I think the only disagreements I would have is that I do think that when you said Ben's towards the bottom of the 50-50, I just feel like, you know, the fact that he knew that if he got to the end, he was going to get completely reamed at the final tribal. I feel like he just like, there's nothing else for him to prove. I feel like Sarah, even though she got so close again, there's nothing else for her to prove. But I think everyone else that you mentioned for the likely and the somewhat likely do have a shot. I think Adam is in the same boat as someone like me, where if Jeff calls, I'm going. And then granted, Sandra was like that too. Sandra back in the day before she played on Game Changers, I think after Heroes versus Villains, she was asked, would you play again? And she's like, Jeff calls, I'm going. So I think Adam is kind of taking up that torch, no pun intended. I think Adam, if Jeff calls, he's going to go. Meanwhile, now Sandra's going to hang up her crown. But it's really interesting, though, just to think about who could play again. If it's like a, thank you, Jordan, for the pun. I'm glad he got that. But I feel like most of these people are just not going to play again. And I can't fault them for it. You know, life gets in the way. Your story arc is done. And if you get out of it what you want to get out of it, then hang up the shoes right here.
Yeah, for sure. Do we want to move on to the next question? I know you have all the questions as well.
Yeah, we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, for sure.
So you want me to go for it?
Yeah, you can read it. You can read this one. We'll alternate.
Sure. All right. So we also have from Twitter, and like Dylan said, we have 4 questions we pulled from Twitter. But of course, if anyone in the chat has any questions, let us know and we'll go through them. Now is the time to go over anything season 40 related. We were asked which 5 players played the best game from this season, and I think this is a really good question because I think, listen, if we had to pick one best player of the season, it's Tony. It's a open and shut answer. That's it. But I think 5 people makes us have to dig deeper. Like, you know. Because if you ask me, were the top 5 the 5 best players of the season, I would say no. I feel like you can look a little bit deeper than that. So in my opinion, I put a list together of 4 people that I thought played the best game this season, and then 3 honorable mentions. So, and I wonder if Dylan would be able to help me pick my 5th spot, or Dylan agrees with me. So obviously you have to pick Tony. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but basically Tony socially, physically, strategically dominates the season, basically from start to end, lowering his threat level, ramping it up with the Sophie vote out, and then just dominating it at the end, not getting a single vote. On a winter season, you're the greatest of all time. Tony's one of the best players of the season. Sarah, I think Sarah, it's interesting because I disagree with a couple people when I hear them say Sarah rode coattails of Tony. I just think that that's a disrespect to Sarah's game. I think we've seen that she's a great social player. She obviously knows how to maneuver strategically. We saw that in Game Changers. She had potential in Kaguyan, and we saw it realized here. I think if she beats Tony in the fire, I think there's a very likely chance Sarah wins this season. Sophie, we already talked about it earlier, came in super underrated as a winner, and now is regarded as, I think, one of the best players of the season. She did so well in the pre-merge. She was situated so well as a part of Yule's four-person alliance. Tyson even forgot her name. That's how good she is at being under the radar. And then she does a good job at being in charge of, the Wendell vote out and then, the Adam vote out. Tyson goes out and we see her dominating her whole little alliance when she says, guys, let's go over here, make a plan. I think Sophie does a great job, and I think Sophie is potentially one of our winners, hypothetically, if Tony doesn't take her out. So she played well. And then the fourth person I had was Michelle. Michelle, like Dylan said, played a great game. Obviously was not on the right side of the vote, but the scrappy underdog story is great. Had great social relationships, probably one of the top 5 social players that we've ever seen, if we're going to go off of that sphere. And I think that if you're somebody who in back-to-back seasons that you play make the final 3, and you're one of like 10 people to ever make it to the end twice, you get a lot of respect. So Michelle's my 4th. Now for the last pick, really quickly, I would just say my 3 honorable mentions would be Jeremy, Denise, and Natalie. Natalie obviously beasted it out at the edge, but when you're the first vote out, it's hard to say if you played the best game of the season, but I think she did fight hard. Denise is noted as the Queen Slayer, and I think Denise did play a good social game, but I think she did kind of burn out at the end. And then Jeremy is a great player no matter what anyone says, but he was targeted a lot at the end there, so that kind of hurts him a little bit. But those would be my 4 best players and then my 3 honorable mentions. I want to hear what you have to say.
So I have the same top 4.
Okay, great.
I think that Tony's number 1 for obvious reasons. He won the game. He pretty much dominated the post-merge part of the game after laying low, which I thought was just laying low was just, I know it seems obvious, but for him to just knowing what we know about Tony, the fact that he actually was able to do that was incredible. Number 2 and 3, I'm split between Sarah and Sophie. Probably give the edge to Sarah because she did end up going further, but Sophie was clearly a massive threat. The fact that Tony wanted to get her out when he did, even though that Sophie was going to vote with him. In terms of Sarah, I think that she was a major part of the decision making when it comes to the whole Cops Are Us Tony alliance. I know we saw more of Tony's point of view because he did end up winning the game, but like we saw, Tony had to listen to Sarah at times. Otherwise, Sarah would have never wanted to work with him. So I think that, they obviously have the bond where they would have wanted to work together, but it wouldn't have worked as well as it did if they didn't listen to each other pretty equally. So I don't think that at all. I don't think at all that she rode coattails. I think that Sarah would be firm number 2 or 3 for me. And then in terms of Sophie, she really impressed me. She seemed to be the one that always knew what was going on. And I think that like people were coming to her all the time, and Tony saw that. She always seemed to know what exactly was going on. And I know that in the interview that I watched with Sarah the other day, she said that that Sophie would have easily won if brought with Tony and Sarah to the end. So I thought that was really interesting of her to say from a perspective of somebody who's actually playing the game. Then my 4, I also do have Michelle. While she wasn't on the right end of the numbers, the fact that she was socially able to keep weaving her way in despite being outside on the outside was really impressive. I love the story of somebody who plays from the bottom, and Michelle did a great job of that, and she also, I know we saw from her little like fight with Nick, she always knew what was going on. Like, even though she was on the wrong ends of votes, like she always, like she had a good read of everything going on in the game. And I think that's really a testament to her social game. Now 5, I do have Denise. I gave her the edge for the move for the Sandra move. And I think that she was, while we didn't see it completely, she actually had 0 confessionals in the finale, but Denise, I thought, played a great social game. She made bonds that got her as far as she did. And she also did make that great move. So I'm going to give it to her, but I would give an honorable mention to Jeremy just because he kind of pulled a Michelle for a large part of the game where he was on the block for almost every vote and he still managed to stay alive. So I would give props to that. So interesting. We do have very similar ideas. So let me get this banner out of here as we move on to the next question. So the next question we have from Twitter. So we mentioned, okay. So we have from Megan on Twitter, we have, would you want to see fire tokens back, and how could production improve their function moving forward in future seasons? Go
Yeah.
for it.
So I think fire tokens, in terms of the two major twists this season, you have fire tokens and Edge of Extinction, which I'm sure we're going to get to when we break the season down at the very last part. But fire tokens, I think, were more well received. I think they introduced, like Yule kept saying, it's an economy. It's a type of currency that really allows for, social dynamics to take root. I feel like fire tokens really were an interesting concept, and I do want to see them back. I don't want to see them back every season. I don't want this to be like the new immunity idol where we see it every single season and it's now a staple. I'm fine if, every 3 seasons or whatever we see them come back, because I think they can be improved upon. And I think that's the mark of a great show that's been around for 40 years, is that how do you introduce new things and then how do you evolve those new things? I guess the answer, was it Megan you said?
Yeah.
To answer Megan's other half of the question about how would production improve them, I think you have to make them, for one, more well-known. I feel like we constantly heard this season, we don't know what fire tokens will turn into. They could become idols. They could become more important things. We don't know. I feel like if you're going to introduce a new currency, the player should really know from the start what they can entail. It's almost kind of like the controversial fire-making twist that was introduced at the end of Ben's season, where no one knew it was coming, and it's like, oh, well, if we knew that coming in, I would have planned differently. So I think the players have to know what's going on. Number 2, I think it cannot disrupt the game with advantages. I think when you have the edge in play, I know the edge is going to go away for a while, when you have fire tokens being able to be bought for advantages that can actively hurt someone in the game if they're playing well, I think that ruins the integrity of the game. Now, Tony, we see, masterfully navigates extortion. So all credit to Tony for playing that super well. If it got played on him and he didn't play it well, or on maybe Sophie at the time, we would be all complaining that this just torpedoed someone's game. So I think it can't have that much power with the advantages. And then third, Megan, I would want to see it more as like a social currency or more as a bargaining chip. So I think we saw this with the Queenslayer move where, Sandra and Denise say, if you vote the way I want, I'll give you 1 token now, 1 token after. I would like to see them more used without idols and advantages and more about the social game of, hey, if you vote with me, I'll give you a token. Or, hey, I'm on the bottom. I have 3 tokens. Now, granted, if there's no Edge of Extinction, how do tokens get moved around? You probably could find them in the jungle. You probably could get them from challenges, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're Michelle here and you say, I have 3 tokens, I'm on the bottom, I'll give you 1 now, and if I survive tonight, Nick, or whatever, I'll give you my other 2 tokens. And let's just say they knew, hey, if you have 3 tokens, you can turn this in for 1 idol, for example. That would be so much more interesting, because now Nick's like, ooh, do I care more about an ally that I may or may not be able to trust, or a guaranteed idol with Michelle's tokens? So I feel like I want to see it more for that. Those are my thoughts about how fire tokens could be brought back and re-implemented.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points. And, I agree with a lot of what you said. In terms of what I think, I would like to see fire tokens back every season going on.
Really? Every season?
Yeah, because I just think, from my perspective, I don't think fire tokens were used to their potential in this season. I think it was mostly just a test going forward and a new twist to add to a new twist of strategy for all winners. But I would like to see it going forward in every season. I think that Jeff kind of alluded that it will happen. I just think there's so much that you could do with them, and we won't have the edge dynamic going forward. So the question is, how are we going to use these tokens? How are we going to use these tokens in a way that makes the game that improves the game for the viewers or for the audience, and also improves the game for the players? So I think that a major way to do this is I think there has to be ways, like within the game, to get tokens. Like you're not just getting tokens if you're on edge, or if someone gets. I like the being gifted once you get voted out. That's fine, because it kind of levels the playing field a little bit. But there will be no edge to send fire tokens to or whatnot. I think there maybe that fire tokens could kind of be hidden around, if maybe, like, remember that Rob challenge on Edge of Extinction? I think that could be something that happens, but on like the actual island. And I also would like to see challenges like within the actually on the island and in the game to get fire tokens. So like, for example, instead of running up and getting coconuts on the edge, you're running up and getting coconuts in the game. So I think that that's one way to do it. And another thing is, I think that this is my main problem that I had with this season in fire tokens. I think there needs to be an end game for it. So fire tokens just ended so abruptly in this season, where we're all of a sudden we're at an immunity challenge, and Jeff is just like, well, this is the last time you could use fire tokens, and we're like, that was it. Like all the hype, all the saving of fire tokens just for nothing. So I think that fire tokens need to give some sort of advantage at the end. Or it needs to, I don't know what it would be, but you need to have incentive to get fire tokens and incentive to have them and save them at the end. Like there has to be consequence to give them away enough, and also while also being incentive to save them as long as you could, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I think the one problem that I mentioned on the podcast last time, and I think you kind of also co-signed this as well, is that you can't have a big blowout for them, because then if everyone can just buy advantages or idols, you have advantage get in part two. So how do you have them where they have an interesting payoff, but also make sense without being overpowered? I feel like if Jeff says, they're going to end at this vote, or, you can turn them in at the merge, you can cash them all in now. I feel like as long as there's a payout at some point, that's fine, just not too late in the game where it can cause a situation where somebody gets unfairly booted from the game. I feel like fire tokens can be implemented in a way where people are incentivized to use them for currency, or maybe if they're brought back, we will see them use more for more survival aspects and new players. Maybe new players, if it's a really rainy season, like Philippines, it rained all the time. Cambodia had a really bad 5-day rainstorm that never ended. Maybe in those moments, we're going to see more of, hey, fire tokens will be bought for the tarp, or hey, reward challenge. Hey guys, we're going to split the merge tribe into 2 teams. Winner gets Applebee's. Or would you give up the Applebee's for 4 fire tokens to buy you a tarp for this rainstorm? I want to see them use more for more, even if it's not a big blowout, maybe more individual payouts possibly.
I also think if players knew exactly what the tokens would get you,
exactly,
I think that would lead to a lot more, maybe I'll vote with you if you give me this amount of fire tokens. I think we would see more of that. I don't need to see that every vote for sure, but I kind of like the idea of using it as a strategic tool, kind of like the Parv Wendell thing that we saw kind of start happening and then kind of didn't happen. I think that it would incentivize, that would add another layer. Whereas this season, they didn't really know, they kind of wanted to hold on to them. And that's why there wasn't a huge use of them. But I would love to see a lot of bordering, if that makes sense as well.
Yeah, it does. And actually one interesting thing, and I've never seen this show, but I hear that there's a show called The Genius. If anyone's seen The Genius or heard of it, it's kind of like Survivor in a way, where there's a lot of social strategy and gameplay. And they have a currency as well. And the currency can be used to buy things. However, and I don't think CBS would do this because I know it gets kind of finicky, but in this Genius show, that currency, if you hold on to it, you could buy your advantages and stuff like that. But if you hold on to it, it turns into money at the end of the game. So your prize pot is bigger if you hold on to them. So I feel like that's a better payout. I don't think CBS would copy that, or CBS would do that, but that's a good example of, okay, you can save up your tokens. You won't get it unfairly ejected from the game if you don't have enough. You'll just get more money at the end. And if you buy an advantage early on that wasn't worth it, then you kind of just blew that money. So,
right. And I think the reason why the immunity idol is still there and has worked so well, one, it's amazing television. But if you think about it, it can be used in so many different ways. So you find the immunity idol, and then you could obviously you have incentive to try to keep it as long as you could, because you could play it until 5 and it could save you. But you also have incentive, as we saw with Tony. So I heard an interesting Tony stat. He's never voided votes with an immunity idol, which is bizarre, because you always think Tony has never voided votes with an immunity idol before.
He's never voided. He's never voided. Oh, okay, yeah.
Right. So he's just used it pretty much as he uses it as a fear tool. He instills fear with other people. It's my pockets are full, or he tells people that he has an idol in order to get them closer to him. So I just think that that's why the idol is the idol is such a powerful tool that works so well.
Yeah.
And then if you go like, I think that fire tokens need to have some like just more incentive for the players and could be used in multiple different ways. But I think we pretty much went over everything with fire tokens.
Yeah, I think that obviously Jeff is listening. I know that people made their comments about Edge of Extinction, and that's why that's going away. I wonder if with this long off season, because they haven't really filmed the seasons yet, I wonder if Jeff has been paying attention to fans, both comments, criticisms, praise about fire tokens, and I wonder if he'll implement those. I have seen a lot of great fan theories online and a lot of great things mentioned in a lot of YouTube and podcast comments about what they could become. So I feel like if Jeff takes some great feedback, they could be really made into a really great game changer.
Right. I agree. But let's move on to the next question. Do you have that?
Yeah. So again, this is the last question we have from Twitter. So if you have any questions in the chat, start getting them in now. I think I saw a couple start to come in. But the question that is on everyone's mind is that where would we rank the season? Now, I've got a lot to say on this. I know Dylan and Jordan have their own thoughts, so I'll turn it over to them. All I know is that, it's going to vary per person. And obviously, any kind of ranking is, as Stephen Fishback famously says, all rankings are arbitrary and reductive. But I'm really interested to see where you would rank it, Dylan, where I would rank it, and where some other people are ranking it.
So I think I would definitely have it top 3 to top 5. And I say that pretty, like, I'm pretty sure, I know a lot of people disagree. I've seen people say that they would have it at the back end of the top 10. I've seen people say they would have it just out of the top 10. I would personally have it as top 3 to top 5. And I think a major reason is, for me, when I'm watching, there's 2 major things I look at. Is the cast great? Yes, it was probably the best cast ever. And what's the gameplay like? The gameplay was on a completely another level this season. It was like so much reverse psychology going on, so many things that were brought up that you would have never if you're watching Survivor in the first 10 seasons and then you just immediately jump to this season, you're like, wow, like this evolved to such a level that you would have never even thought. And just in general, there's also, I look at the moments. So how many big moments are there that I'm going to remember in the future? And we kind of went over this at the beginning. There's a lot of them. I'll never forget the kind of send off that they had for all these great players. And I'll never forget the emotional Cops Are Us moment, the Cops Are Us storyline, Tony dominating post merge, the very beginning scene where they're all on the beach together. I just think that this was such a memorable season. And in addition to the great gameplay, I think that is why I have it top 3 to 5. And that's not gonna, I can't really, like, as you said, all rankings are arbitrary. I don't really think I could be convinced otherwise that this is top 3 to 5, but I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah. And again, that's why whenever you watch any YouTuber podcast that ranks something, whether it's Survivor seasons or best, comedy TV shows, it's that person's opinion. There's no right answer. I mean, if you put Heroes versus Villains as the last place, you're wrong. But the point overall is that, it's that person's list. You can't really tell them that their opinion is wrong. You can disagree with it, and I would love to hear why people maybe disagree. But I do think that if you have an opinion, unless you rethink it, it's going to be hard to change. And I thought you brought up a really good point before I give my answer, is that you mentioned if you're a watcher of the first few seasons and you jump to this, you went to warp speed. But now it's all changed. So I think you're right. I think I'm somebody, if people forgot, I started watching live season, I think 19. Samoa and Heroes versus Villains were my first 2 seasons live. I've been watching them live since, and then in the off seasons, I've gone back and watched all the old seasons. So I have seen them all, but I started at the middle, watched live through, and then went back at the beginning. But somebody like my friend Brett, he started season 1 or 2 with his family. He's been an avid old school fan, and he feels like even though the season was, fun, it was way too many advantages. The game in itself has been kind of like marred by all this stuff. So he would not put it in his top 10. So I feel like you bring up a very good point that basically when you start watching the show, what type of fan you are, that's going to like color how you see the season. So with that being said, I have to still narrow mine down. I don't have a number yet. I would say for me, it would be ranked between 6th place and 10th place. So the back half of the top 10. A couple of reasons for that. Let's go with the pros. Like you say, Dylan, best cast of all time, no matter what. Tony, one of the best characters. That you could argue, like, Coach is this great character, Tyson, whatever. Tony's the best winner ever, the best player ever, and one of easily the most entertaining people ever. We have the great Cops R Us stories, some great character moments. But now let's get to the bad parts. Look, if you have Edge of Extinction, and I know this might sound controversial to like you, Dylan, and Jordan, who's in the comments, automatic deduct 5 points. I can't have you in my top 5 seasons if you have Edge of Extinction. Edge of Extinction, and this is the last chance I'll have to rant about it for a while, but it is so flawed. The fact that you are rewarded from being voted out later in the game, and you actually should want to be voted out earlier so you can get more advantages and make more friends. It got so broken. I'm so happy Extortion didn't ruin Tony's game because it easily could have torpedoed his game. The editing was really choppy at points. At the Tyson vote out, all of us, including us in the podcast, we had no idea where anyone voted because the editing was so confusing. Because if you remember, they squeezed half an hour of the loved ones visit in there, 5 minutes of an immunity challenge. So we only had like 5 to 10 minutes of strategy, and then we were off to tribal with whispering with no subtitles. So if you have all those things, for me personally, I cannot put it in my top 5. I will see where it falls between 6 and 10, maybe like 8 or 9 for me personally, but I still really love the season. All Winners was absolutely amazing. It's everything I could have hoped for. But one more thing to mention that we haven't talked about yet is the boot order. Dylan, how important is boot order to your rankings?
Well, it depends. So I think that the cast was good enough where you were able to afford all those players going out, where like Rob goes out, Tyson goes out, Parvati goes out, Sandra goes out. Like you could afford all that in a row because the cast is so great. What did I know I didn't name them exactly in order, but I named like, it was like that kind of boot order, right? Yeah. So I think that this season was able to combat that a lot better than Game Changers was. Where Game Changers, you saw, if you were looking at the cast, and I know obviously this has changed because Sarah's arguably a top 10 player ever, top 15 player ever, at this point. But going into that season, if you looked at the cast and then you told me that the final 3 were Troy, Zan, Brad, and Sarah, I'm sure nobody would be happy, and a lot of people weren't happy at the time. So I think that it depends on the season. If you have a very, very strong cast, I think that the boot order isn't that meaningful. Okay. Was the case with this. I also want to touch on a few different things that you mentioned in terms of the edit and the edge. So we have this comment here from Josh Gallegos where he says, I don't think you could have done this season without edge. Jeff said he couldn't get winners to commit if they didn't think they had a second chance. So whether or not that's true, whether he couldn't get them to commit, I don't know. And I do think that the edge is completely flawed. I think that, and I know Steven Fishback, he tweeted this out. I believe it was last night. And I know that we had talked about this. I think that you can't reward somebody who's been on, like, Natalie was amazing on Edge, so I don't want to take anything away from her, but she should not have a better chance to get back into the game because she's been on Edge longer. So you're getting rewarded for being voted out first. And I don't like that at all. But I think a major way to fix the Edge would have been where it was like maybe Jeremy and Kim and Nick start ahead of everyone else and you could earn advantages to catch up to them. I think that would have been a better way to do it. And that's what Fishback tweeted out last night. He's like, I think that's how you fix it. So yeah, I didn't love the Edge in terms of the way it was done. I think I liked the way the Edge was done better than the original Edge of Extinction season where it actually had an impact on the game. But I did not like how Natalie had such a advantage because she was there the longest. I don't think that's right because a player like Jeremy should have just as equal of a chance as Natalie. Like Jeremy should not be penalized for going forward in the game. That's the best way to say it. In terms of the editing, I think that, at times it was confusing, but personally, I don't really value editing when I rank a season. And I also think that at times, even though the editing, like for us podcasters, it's tough because we want to analyze everything. But if you're just a general viewer, I think that it's great to not know what's going to happen. And I think a lot of times this season, I was truly shocked. I truly thought Tony was going to go home when Sandra did. And there were plenty of other instances where I really had no idea what was going to happen. And that's why I like that style of editing. But if we're trying to figure out stuff that happened for a podcast purpose, it's not great.
No, but I think you bring up a good point though. Yeah.
Go ahead. I was saying.
No, I think you bring up a good point that like we don't want to be sitting through every episode saying, okay, we know what the outcome is. Because the whole part of the whole part of being a viewer is, okay, we're waiting for the last 5 minutes. Who's going to get voted out tonight? That's the whole reason we tune into the show. So you're right. We don't want to know what's going to happen. But like you say, when we're podcasters or, we're even really big avid fans, we need to really see the through line of where the players are on the playing field and how they relate to one another. So here's a good example, because I know some people might say, oh, I like whispering, I like confusing edits, whatever. Let's go talk about Denise for a second. We know that Denise is a great social player. We can easily fill in the blanks by saying, oh, she got to this alliance because she's a good social player and she maneuvers. That's fine. But I feel like we had a very quick turnaround, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, where we saw she was really in good with Jeremy and Kim and that faction.
Right.
Jeremy kind of gets on the outs, and she's like, you know what? I saved him with my idol. I've been in too deep. I can't help him anymore. I'm flipping sides. And after that one moment, she was really in with that whole Sarah and
we never got to see how it happened.
Yeah, and Tony. And I had no idea until the finale that Ben and Denise were like this. They were this tight. And I feel like that's the problem. If you want to have, whispering and confusing moments where we don't know who goes home and you're shocked, I think it makes for great TV, and I give them all the credit for it. But again, when we can't follow the relationships and how people relate to one another, and all of a sudden I'm seeing Denise with that group when she was with group A the whole time, and her and Ben were secretly tight, I feel like it just gets really confusing. If you want to have longer episodes to show these moments and fill in more of the blanks of the story, I'm all for it. We all want more longer episodes. But I feel like that's the point I make with the editing, where if I can't really follow the through line, then it gets a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point. I would have loved to see some of those social connections that we didn't get to see. And if anybody's wondering, I would probably have Winners at War. I said 3 to 5. I think it would probably be closer to top 3 than top 5 for me. If anyone wants to know my top 5 seasons, not in order, Heroes, Villains, Cambodia, Second Chances, then Winners at War, and then Micronesia and Kagayan. So those are my top 5. In terms, and I know that we're seeing in the comments that when you started watching live determines on what you think of different seasons. I watched for a while before I got like very into it again. I was watching on and off throughout the years, and then went back and filled in. But like season 31 for me, Second Chances, was the season that I felt like I really, really regained my love for Survivor again, and like got very, very into it. So I'm a little bit biased towards that season. I love it. Also, Kelly and Jeremy are two of my favorites of all time, and that obviously they made it to Final Four. So I thought that was great. But yeah.
And then to address your point, in case anyone was wondering, well, Ryan, if you're going to rank it between 6 and 10, what do you have above Winners at War? I also agree. So many seasons are all like running through my head right now. Heroes versus Villains, 100% above that for me. Pearl Islands, Micronesia, Cambodia, Cagayan, and then Borneo. I think Borneo's tough. I was talking to Dylan about this offline, but Borneo is basically where you either have to have it in your top 5 or you can't rank it, because it's what started the show. Like Richard Hatch starting the concept of what an alliance is. It basically set up the legacy for the show to go 20 years, 40 seasons. So some people, for that reason, don't even rank Borneo, which I think is fair. But if you have to rank it, it has to be in my top 5. So again, Borneo, Heroes versus Villains, Pearl Islands, Cagayan, Cambodia, Micronesia in some order. And then in the rest of my top 10, you start filing in what else could go into that list as well.
Yeah. No, for sure. I definitely think that all those points you made are fair. I actually just rewatched Pearl Islands recently, and it's so interesting to see how ahead of its time it is. It's great. But we do have a few. I did stumble upon a few more questions on Twitter that we did not answer, so I want to run through those quick before we get to questions from people who are watching right now.
Go. Any Twitter question, or before we get to the comments and the questions in the chat?
So we have. Did Tony play the greatest game ever? I already mentioned that I thought he did. Boston Robin 22 is probably my second. I don't know do you think Tony played the greatest game ever? I know I mentioned multiple times I did, so that's why I don't want to spend too much time here.
Like in a single season?
Yeah.
I think Tony played the greatest game in a single season. The fact that you get no votes cast against you is a pretty tall order, especially somebody of Tony's target and legacy. And I think, like I said, physically, he wins 4 challenges. Socially, he gets fire tokens from other winners and the extortion advantage. That's a great social knock on his, not knock, social notch on his belt. And then strategically taking out Sophie, so he eliminates Sarah's options, but still brings her closer, lowers his threat level. I think in a singular season, Tony plays the best game in a single season. Yeah.
Next one. Which survivor would do the best if given a chance to return for another season? That's what Showman asks us on Twitter. I have a pretty simple answer to this one, and it might, I don't know if it's like, I don't know if you'd consider it mainstream. I think if you're taking one player to go the furthest out of anybody from this season, if they played again, I think that my number one would have to be Michelle. The reason behind that is that I think that Michelle, no matter what, no matter the fact that she got to the end twice, is somebody that you're going to meet and want to work with, somebody you could trust. Her social game's so great, and that's why I would choose her to go the furthest if she played again. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I think you make a lot of good points. I think Michelle, like I mentioned, is a top 5 social player, like socially one of the best players of that sphere. I think that you can always pencil her in to make the merge. If she plays in a vacuum and she plays in, we're going Doctor Strange here, where she plays like in 100 different universes, like how many universes does she make it to the end? Almost all of them. She's great. The only fear I have with her coming back and doing just as well again is tied to what Suri said about Courtney in Panama, where if you know someone's going to make it to the end no matter what, because either they're a goat or they're likable or whatever, they're taking up one of your seats. So that's where we see Suri make the 3-2-1 against Courtney. Now, Courtney's not the biggest threat. She's not going to win in a jury vote, but basically when Shane, Aris, Terry, when they're all saying, oh, we're going to take Courtney with us, Suri's like, because that back then it was a final 2, she's like, that's one of my 2 seats. I now have a less chance of getting there. So I want to take Courtney out, and that's why she pulls off the amazing 3-2-1. I agree with your point. Michelle will do well if she plays again, but I wonder if we get now to final 10, 9, 8, 7, and some savvy player goes, Michelle's going to make it there again. Why would I let Michelle get there again if she's going to steal one of my seats? So that's the only flaw I have with that, but you bring up a good point.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you that Michelle would definitely face that fear. Like people would be like, all right, she could easily get to the end. Like everyone loves her. But yeah, no, who would you choose Michelle also if you were choosing?
You know what? I'm going to go the Tony route and say like a great, bad, great, kind of like a parabola or like an inverse arc. But I'm going to maybe go, if not Michelle, just for argument's sake, I'm going to go with Wendell, actually. I feel like if Wendell came back, and Adam, I love Adam because he's a super fan like we are, but I feel like because of his frenetic nature, he'll never be trusted again in that regard, like his first season. I feel like Wendell did so well because he was so likable and so loyal with Dominic. Now gets painted in this villain edit, mainly because of his relationship with Michelle. I feel like if Wendell comes back, who's going to gun for Wendell? I feel like he was taken out in this game at the merge, mainly because Sophie says, I want to weaken Jeremy. Now let's go into a new season. There's no Jeremy there. Wendell is the same guy he was in Ghost Island. I can see Wendell going far again.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think Wendell's a good choice. I thought Wendell was going to go very far in this season. And I mean, we don't know what completely went on behind the scenes, but we obviously saw the edit. So, yeah, I think Wendell's a good choice. But last question we have here from Liam Stewart on Twitter. This is an interesting one. And I would like, I want you to take this one because I feel like I'm a little bit unsure. And I'll think as you go, but you'll have an answer right away. I know, because I know you've definitely thought about this. Knowing what we know now about how the season went, relationships, more new school style play, new schoolers taking out old schoolers who weren't adaptable, aka Rob, Danny, etc. Which winner, not on the season, do you think would have done the best?
Okay, so wait, repeat that one more time.
Okay, I'm not going to read the full question, but it's basically ask which winner, knowing everything that we do about this season, knowing we've seen the whole thing. Which winner not on this season do you think would have done the best?
Which winner not on the season would do the best? That is a good question because it's going to depend on so many variables. Like, I think that if Natalie is not on the same tribe as Jeremy, I don't think she goes first this season. I think also Natalie, I had her pegged going far because she didn't play in Game Changers due to a concussion. So I thought her threat level would be way down, and it wasn't. I guess if I had to answer that question, who on not on Winners at War would do well, let's go with, I feel like an Earl Cole would do well from Fiji. I feel like Earl was such a likable guy, was I think under the radar, like strategist, good social player. I feel like he did pretty good physically, I feel like. I don't see anyone going for Earl. I mean, granted, and actually Jake just said the same thing in the chat, Earl Cole. I feel like, you could make the argument, the counterpoint, well, what about the Danny Boatwright effect where no one's talking about Danny and then Danny self-implodes? I don't think Earl would self-implode. Earl was very quiet, very calculating, casual, and kind of let some other people in his alliance, like Yao Man, kind of take the front for him. So I feel like Earl would do well if he was here.
Yeah, I've seen a ton of people say that, and I believe he was supposed to be on this season, but pulled out of contention because he had the birth of his son. So I'm not really, I'm not really sure the whole background of that, but I know that Survivor wants to have him on in the future, and he actually tweeted out something like, "The end to a great season. Maybe you'll see me out there soon." So I think that he possibly plans on coming back at some point. I think Survivor definitely wants to have him back, so that'll be interesting. Actually, somebody in the comments said Tommy from season 39. The only issue is obviously the winners did not see Tommy win.
Yeah.
Because they didn't see Tommy's season unless you're Robin Sandra, you didn't see Tommy, so he couldn't have been on. But I think it's kind of interesting, the Tommy thing, because Tommy's win, it wasn't amazing, it was solid. Tommy's win in 39 will always be overshadowed by all the controversy in the season, so I would love to see him get another opportunity. Just my opinion.
Yeah. I'm totally fine if Tommy wants to get another shot. Just give him time for people to see his game first, to be fair. But yeah.
Right. Okay, so now that we are done with Twitter questions, we will move on to questions in the comments. Ask anything you want, and we will answer them. I'm going to scroll back right now to see.
Any questions that you see or any good comments to address. Like, it could just be a comment that we want to delve more into, but anything that you see that it will be good to discuss.
So we have, okay, I'm going to take this. Okay, ready? Not 40 related, but who of the last 5 seasons, not including 40, are on your short list to return next? I'm hoping for another second chances, 43 and 44. So before we get answering this, quick thing that we were going to probably say at the end, but one of the main focal points of our off-season content is going to be, we'll be doing like kind of fan drafts or cast drafts, if we want to call it that, where we're drafting what we think are realistic future casts. And basically, like, if we're doing me, Jordan, and Ryan all on the podcast, we'll do something like 3 different tribes, and we'll each choose 6 players or 7 players. And then, or if it's just 2 of us, like me and Ryan, we'll do 10 players each, where we'll do a draft. We'll each get picks of who we think should be on the season. So I don't want to get into this because, ironically, our first fan cast will probably be second chance too, because every single person, including us, wants to see that again. So I don't want to answer that, but we will answer it in a future video. So thank you, Megan, for asking.
Thank you. That. Great question.
Okay. Let's see. What do we think this theme of next season will be? From Mark. So, Ryan, I want to hear your answer to this, but before you talk, Ryan, from what I read, it looks like that from what's out there, it looks like that 41 and 42 are going to be newbie seasons, where it's going to be all new players. Now, I don't know if that means that season 42 will have like 4 returnees or something like that, where we get like what we did in 38, where it's mostly newbies and then 4 returnees. But yeah, it looks like the next few seasons, the next 2 seasons at least, are going to be new seasons, and then we'll probably have a returnee season for 43. What do you think that a possible all new season theme would be?
What do I think the theme will be? That's interesting. I think it's actually a good thing that we're going to go to an all new player season, because I feel like, and again, this is another concept that Peridium discusses in one of his videos, the different eras of Survivor. It's a really great video, kind of breaks up where each of the 40 seasons, what eras would they be broken up into. I feel like after you have an all returning player season, you kind of have to like wipe the slate clean. So, Borneo to All-Stars at the classic era, after All Stars, you have to have a couple seasons of new players before you get to returnees. Same thing with Heroes versus Villains. Same thing with, this season. So to answer Mark's question, what would the next theme be? Oh, God. I feel like what's a new player theme that we have not seen yet? Oh, also, actually, really quickly, while I'm answering this question, I know we were talking about on the finale recap, like, why is Jeff asking for like 16 and 17-year-olds to apply? One thing I didn't consider is that I'm pretty sure 41 and 42, the casts are already figured out. So once these 16 and 17-year-olds can apply, it'll be a year or two in advance, and then they'll be 18. So I guess it makes sense now. He's kind of just widening the pool for the time being. I'm actually stumped. Like, what's a new theme for a new player season I haven't seen yet? I guess if they want to reuse an old theme again, I guess you could reuse Millennials and Gen X if you want to use like a theme like that. I'm not really interested in seeing Blood versus Water for the third time. I don't want to see Brains, Brawn, and Beauty for the third time. Maybe
I think a generation type thing is going to be very likely in 41 or 42. I don't know whether he mentioned 16 truly because they will be 18 by the time they go out there, or did he mention 16 because he was kind of hinting towards a generations thing? It could be either one. It could be both. But I think a generations thing would be really, really cool. If you add older players versus younger players again, that'd be a great thing. I've also seen on, I look at Reddit all the time, to like different ideas. And I like, somebody mentioned like a regions type thing. So based on where you live, I think that because regions are so like different in this country, I think it would be kind of an interesting thing to see. But I truly have, I have no idea. And I'm like, I keep every day when I refresh Twitter, I look forward to seeing the day that they're like, they're going to film and this is the theme. I look forward to it. It's going to happen one of these days.
Listen, they're really pushing the fact that we're going to have 41 in the fall. So I'm hoping that we get that news soon, hopefully.
Yeah. And even if they record, like, so let's just say that I'm just throwing out imaginary dates. Let's say that it's supposed to premiere September 14th. I'm not sure what the actual date is. They could start filming in late July and be done right at the end of August and still have the first episode ready by that first day in September. So even if it's cutting close, they cut it close. But yeah, I think it's going to be a generations type thing, at least one of those next two seasons. All right, we have Hef in the comments here.
Yeah, we have to answer Hef's two questions before we get anyone else.
Not with us
afterwards.
All right, so 2 questions from our other co-host as he's watching. We have 1. What do you think of my fire token idea? Reminder, each fire token lowers your rope in Final 4 fire making challenge by 1 inch or raises the other person's rope by 1 inch. I don't think it's a terrible idea, but I don't like it doesn't help you get to the end of the game, if that makes sense. Like, it wouldn't give you something that would help you get to the end, except for in that Final 4 fire making. Like, if you're not chosen to go to fire making, then who cares? So that's what I think a flaw is. Another flaw is I think that people would complain that it's too like overpowering. Because if you are in that fire making challenge and your rope is 2 inches smaller, it's a huge advantage.
I mean, look, all I'm going to say is I think it's a creative idea. I have not heard this idea at all yet, so I think it's really interesting. But I feel like already the fire making twist is so controversial because some people still, I mean, I agree, we don't love it. And I think if you add another wrinkle like this in, it just gets way too cute of an idea and it just could blow up in their face. I mean, imagine if production wants a certain player to really make it to the end and then it blows up in their face. I just feel like there's a lot of potential problems, but it's really creative though.
Next one from Hef. Will the woman, this is a great question. Will the woman singing be reused in the theme music for the season? You better be ready. It's coming for you. So that's actually C, I believe. I don't know. Interesting question. We'll have to see. I feel like it's going to be unique. I feel like it's going to be unique to Winners at War because if you actually listen to the whole song, you can find it on YouTube somewhere. They start singing about Winners at War somewhere in there. So I feel like it is unique, but interesting question.
They're not bringing that song back and don't bring it
back. All right. Any other questions before we hop off here about season 40 or future Survivor?
Let's see.
If there are no other questions, we'll get into what we'll be doing in the off season. next few
Yeah,
weeks.
no, yeah, I'm looking for any last minute questions or comments before we get to what we're doing in the off season. I thought we addressed most of it actually. I think that I mean also Hef brought up that Megan brought up a good point in the chat that you can't really keep the costs of things a secret to the fans. Like we need to know what the menu says, so that should have been like more published, but also the players should know what things cost and the players should know how things work. So
Yeah. We have a new question here, so I just put it up. So fire tokens were a new addition. What will be the next edition that you would like to see? Examples: a Final Four competition, and last place person is out. Buy access to 30 seconds of confessionals, idle nullifier, or idle unnullifier. Wow, that's really going far. I don't know what I haven't really thought about this. Like what are new potential additions that we could see in Survivor? I don't think they would do a Final Four competition and last person's out, because then you're putting basically you play all this way. I think this is a reason why they added the fire making in the first place, because you go all this way, and if you lose an immunity challenge, that could ruin your entire game. So I think that's like the reason why they added in the fire making. I don't think that they'll have a Final Four competition and last place is voted out. Buying access to 30 seconds of confessionals, I don't think that would ever happen, just because it's just like it's kind of taking something that's like outside the game almost. And then an idle on nullifier, that's like crazy. Like that's multiple layers. So I don't know if we would see that either. But what do you think, Ryan?
I think that I'm not sure if the show needs a new twist or addition right now. Maybe at the back end of the 40s, if we're still on the air, then I feel like maybe then we'll see a new wrinkle in the game. But I want to see them explore fire tokens a bit more and see what happens. I feel like there's a lot of potential good uses for them. And actually, I should have sent this to you before the podcast, but I'll have Dylan tweet it for us. Somebody on Twitter basically found a screenshot, maybe CBS posted it, of the Edge of Extinction price list for what you can use your tokens on after the merge. Now, Tyson gets back in the game. Everyone else goes back to EOE. There's a new price list with new costs and new advantages. And there were 2 advantages that we did not see played. Now, this is where I feel like we can start using social currency and we can see fire tokens evolve. So I want to hear your thoughts on this. We saw, the idol with full power when you get back in the game. We saw you can use an advantage in the challenge, the pizza, the peanut butter, all that. 2 advantages that we did not see this season that each cost 2 tokens was create an ally and access to information. So if, again, let's just use somebody like Parvati. Parvati has 2 tokens. Create an ally allows you to send an extra vote to any player in the game, and they will know it came from you. So again, let's just say we see fire tokens come back in a season or 2 and there's no Edge of Extinction. That'd be kind of cool if, like, you can, maybe not this exact wording, but you can basically create a new ally by giving them something in secret. They know it came from you, and that could be kind of cool. And then the second thing, Dylan, is for 2 tokens, access to information, where it provides the current fire token count for every player in the game. Now that I think is really interesting. I feel like it should cost more than 2 tokens if you can see everyone's hand. So maybe it'll cost you like 3 or 4 tokens. But if I knew, like in Survivor, you would love to be able to read minds or see the board and all the inner machinations. If I knew how many tokens each player had, you could be thinking 4 steps ahead. So what do you think about these 2 advantages that we didn't see and maybe could be reutilized if we see fire tokens again?
Okay, so first takeaway is I half saw that today,
Okay.
and I think it's absolutely wild. One, that we did not get to see that play out, because I think there would have been tons of opinions flying, because those are two massive advantages that we did not get to see. And this is funny because this is how I saw it. Pete Yurkowski from season 25 Philippines, he tweeted, "The create an ally is arguably the most powerful thing on this list besides advantages. It never being used concretely mutes any potential edge returnee win. You can gather intel from the newly voted out and literally ghost recon snipe players still in the game. Absolutely wild."
But that's where it gets too powerful, and that's why the edge is bad.
It's very, 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 very powerful. the create an ally, send an wow, you're sending an extra vote. That changes everything. If somebody sent an extra vote into the game when Tony's trying to pull off a 4-3-2, then that blows everything up. Or it helps Tony, or it helps somebody make a vote like that. Then access to information. That was only a 2 token thing. That's crazy. That's so powerful. If you know that this person has 8 fire tokens, like that could help you tremendously. If you know what everybody has, that can help you tremendously. So I think it's very interesting.
I feel like, again, these have to be workshops so that they're not too powerful, because we saw how things can get way too crazy at the edge. But I would love to see these 2 things plus other ideas be workshopped into more of a, again, social currency where people are going to get access to information, or they can utilize their social bonds in the game to strengthen their position. Like Michelle, if fire tokens were reworked differently and she could have used her bonds in a better way, she could have flipped the game to the top for her. So I feel like there's a lot of room to play. So back to Chrissy's first question, there's a lot of ways that we could expand fire tokens, so we may not even need a new twist right now.
And a couple other things that were played for the first time this season, kind of advantage type things. I think Extortion was amazing if it's being used by somebody in the game, not being set from edge. That I love. I hate the fact that somebody out of the game almost blew up Tony's game. That would have been crazy, and that would have probably driven down the season for tons of people if that had actually happened. But from in the game, I love Extortion. Next thing I loved, 50-50 coin. I know we didn't really see it used to its full potential. It did save Michelle, but she wasn't going to go home anyway. Jeremy was the one going home. I think that from a bargaining standpoint, and from like it's so different than an actual idol because it's 50-50. So it's not an actual idol, but you could play it as if you have an actual idol, or you could tell people it's 50-50. Like I think that 50-50 is, from a viewer standpoint, so much suspense when the coin is actually flipped. And then from a strategy standpoint, from the players, just a lot you could do with it. And now we have Jordan here who's saying a new 50-50 coin. You can choose the person that gets voted out if it goes your way, but if it doesn't, you're automatically voted out. Too far.
Oh my God. I cannot imagine the riots in the streets and on Twitter if Jeremy is salty at Tony. If Jeremy's salty at Tony, flips the coin and says, "Oh, great, I can pick who goes out, Tony, get out." People would be going crazy. Again,
first of all, no one's taking the risk if it sends them home. If it lands the wrong way. So that's the other thing. But I do think a 50-50. So I know that was a little extreme from Hef, but I think that a 50-50 coin with like other options is a possibility, or maybe even like a dice with like 6 options. Like I'm trying to get. I know I'm getting a little crazy here, but like. I think it's the possibilities are endless with 50-50 coins. So.
And I think it will come back because I think that there are a lot of uses for it. This is something that I mentioned back when Michelle first got it, or actually maybe it was the week before Jeremy played it. But this is something that Shannon Gus mentioned on Rob's podcast for one of the recaps for RHAP. But there's so much social currency, again, to make a pun with coin and currency, but there's also so much like underlying things you can do with this coin where it creates more options in the game. So Jeremy goes to Ben and says, "Look, I have a coin. If I flip it and I'm safe, next highest votes goes out. So don't vote me." Ben goes, "Well, I can't really vote out Jeremy because if it falls on me, I'm going to go home. What's our third option?" And we can find a third option and maybe like a Kim. So I feel like there's a lot of great underlying things you can do with the coin. I know it was kind of boring with the simple like flip and then like that's it, you're safe. It was kind of anticlimactic, but let Jeff flip it and let's bring it back for more social maneuvers.
I think 50-50 is one of the things from the season that will 100% be back. But if we do not have any more questions, which I don't believe we do, then I will talk quickly about what we're going to do for the off season. So this is the last podcast as we know right now. That could change, but for right now, this is the last podcast that we're doing in terms of Survivor Winners at War. This was just kind of a reflection, the whole thing to tie everything together, wrap it all up. Unless something changes drastically within the next few weeks, this will be the last season 40 podcast. That being said, either next week or the week after, once June starts, we will get started on what we'll probably call some kind of cast draft or fan cast. I know Reddit calls it fan casting, where we will pick a this will be a 10 or 12 part series throughout the whole off season. Each week we will do another theme with returnees, theoretical, and we will pick our ideal cast. So for example, I know I mentioned this before, but let's just say me and Ryan are podcasting. We'll each represent a tribe, and we will do a draft of 10 players each. Let's just say we're doing second chances too, which will probably be our first draft. I would go first, then he would choose 2 players, and then I would choose 2 players, and you would, so kind of a snake kind of draft. And, that'll also give us the opportunity. I know some people were saying that earlier in the season, since we first kind of started up this season and last season with this podcast, a lot of people don't know our thoughts on players that have played in previous seasons. So I think this will really give us a good opportunity to give our thoughts on previous seasons, as well as think of great ideas for Survivor and returnee seasons going forward. So that's going to be a main focal point. We'll probably try and tie together a few creative things going forward, maybe additional podcasts in addition to that. If we get anything else that we decide to do, then we will tell everyone and let everyone know. And we'll also be planning for what we're going to do next season once season 41 does finally start up. So that is all for tonight. If you haven't already, follow us on Twitter at Soul Survivor Pod. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave us a 5-star review. Give us a rating. Other than that, subscribe to us here on YouTube. Like the video; it helps us out a lot. And we'll be back. We'll let you guys know, but we'll be back either next week right away on maybe Wednesday or another day, or once June starts with our first, as we have right here, #CastDraft.
Maybe we should like recall it. Like if we don't want to steal the name, maybe like Castaway Draft. These are all castaways, like Castaway Draft, or we'll workshop the name in some way.
Is Cast Draft copying something else? Has anyone else done that?
I don't know. I'm not sure what Reddit calls it, but I just thought I just came up with Castaway Draft. So I mean that's okay. Just me. But
all right, #Cast Draft. We'll go with it.
All right.
See you, everyone. Thank you for listening.
And as always, we got nothing else for you.